So clearly that means the Earth is just a giant muddy rhinoceros.
I'm sorry, what?
What we call stone, that's the hide. Farmland, the mud. Earthquakes, snoring. All the signs are there.
I think you're jumping to conclusions.
Well, what do you suggest? Are you saying you know better?
I think it's worth slowing down and asking some critical questions. What would prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the Earth is a giant rhinoceros? What would prove beyond a reasonable doubt that it isn't? I think there is a limit to how big blood vessels can be and still work. Plus, the magnetic field around the Earth indicates a molten core, and
You're just a skeptic. You don't know.
okay, hang on. I am skeptical, but I think maybe I was the one who jumped to conclusions. I thought you were putting forth a scientific theory, which doesn't hold water, but it sounds like this is more a matter of faith. I won't make fun of your faith so long as it's okay for me to not have the same one.
Well, I thought I meant, but so you don't believe the Earth is a giant muddy rhinoceros, huh?
I don't.
Well, then maybe we aren't in imminent danger of death if it decides to stand up.
What would it stand on?
Hmm. Hey, did you know that birds aren't real?
We're gonna be here a minute. Roll the intro. Hello and welcome back to Black, White, Gray, Yellow. My name is Diana and this channel is all about communication, connection, and resilience. As a quick background on me, I'm a Master Resilience Trainer in the United States Army National Guard. I also served 13 months as the State Resilience Coordinator at my state's Joint Force headquarters. This series is based on the research behind the skills taught as part of the Master Resilience Training Program, replacing proprietary material with references to open source research and books, so you can share these videos freely. If you want to see more, be sure to like and subscribe. In the last video, I introduced the Resilience ABCs based on Albert Ellis's ABC model, which is a skill that builds self-awareness. Specifically, awareness of our beliefs, or what Dr. Aaron Beck, the father of cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, called our automatic thoughts. We talked about how building that self-awareness is great, but that the whole purpose of it is so that we can do something about our unhelpful thoughts. Today we're going to build on this idea, talking about what Dr. Beck called cognitive distortions, or what we're going to call thinking traps, and what to do about them. Of the 6 things resilient people have, this skill builds mental agility. Apparently, Dr. Beck's development of cognitive behavioral therapy started when he noticed that several of his psychotherapy patients expressed thoughts that were objectively untrue. As he began to pinpoint specific fallacies in these patients' thinking patterns, he started to view their depression as more of a cognitive disorder than a mood disorder. In other words, their feelings weren't necessarily wrong at all. They may have been perfectly appropriate given the thoughts that drove them, but it was the thoughts that were out of alignment. Knowing that we still use cognitive behavioral therapy today to effectively treat disorders from depression and anxiety to schizophrenia and substance abuse, I find this fascinating. To use the definition from the Master Resilience Training Program, thinking traps are overly rigid patterns in our thinking that undermine our ability to accurately assess situations. This definition encompasses a long list of cognitive biases, including the negativity bias that we've talked about in earlier videos. But the pattern we're going to focus on today are instances where we are certain of something without evidence. In other words, when we jump to conclusions. In his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman describes 2 systems our brain uses when thinking. What he creatively calls System 1 is fast, automatic, emotional, and unconscious. This is where our heat of the moment or ticker tape thoughts come from. This system of thinking is very good at saving us from potential threats when we need to act quickly, but often does so by leaping to unwarranted conclusions. I want to acknowledge that the reason our brains jump to conclusions is because it can be helpful. Your primal brain that cares only about your survival benefits from you thinking and acting quickly when there is potential danger. This is the reason behind most of our cognitive biases, in fact. However, there are also a lot of instances when slowing down to critically analyze our situation can only benefit us, and those are the situations we're going to look at today. Throughout this video, I'm going to identify what I'm going to call the 4 S's that can save us from thinking traps. The first of these, our first defense against jumping to conclusions, is to intentionally slow down, to engage our other, slower system of thinking, which Kahneman imaginatively calls System 2. This is the slow, deliberate, logical, conscious mode of thinking. We can do this, slow down, by going through the resilience ABCs and asking ourselves some critical questions, starting with what actually happened? What was the A, the who, what, when, where? What were your emotional, physiological, and behavioral consequences, C? Using thought themes and BC connections that we talked about in the ABC video, can you tease out what your actual ticker tape thoughts or beliefs were that drove those consequences? With each of the specific examples that follow, each of which is a form of jumping to conclusions, we'll introduce some additional critical questions you can ask yourself that will help you identify when you're falling into a thinking trap and how to help you get out of it. 1. Mind reading. The first thinking trap I want to talk about today is called mind reading. This is a term coined by Dr. Beck himself. This is when we assume we know what someone else is thinking or assume that they know what we are thinking. I'll give you some examples. You come home from work and your spouse has left dishes in the sink again, despite you telling him just 3 days ago that this bothers you. You just know he did it on purpose. Your son comes home and isn't talking or making eye contact with anyone. You assume he's mad at you for something you probably didn't even do. Your daughter is paying more attention to the TV than she is to you when you're trying to talk to her. You figure she clearly doesn't respect you. It's your anniversary and your partner didn't bring you flowers. Doesn't she know that that's just what you do on an anniversary? So obviously the big problem with mind reading is that it blocks communication. Rather than actually asking what might be going on, when we mind read, we assume we already know and act based on this often false information. This is a great example of how an inaccurate thought can lead to an inappropriate reaction to a situation. With all forms of jumping to conclusions, the way out of this thinking trap is first to catch ourselves making some conclusion based on little or no evidence, and then asking ourselves some critical questions. With mind reading, we might remind ourselves that our partner can't read minds, and neither can our kids, parents, colleagues, bosses, subordinates, friends, strangers, or we. That's why the second S that can help us get out of this thinking trap is to speak up. So far we've got slow down and speak up. If we're assuming that they should know something about what we want, we can ask, did I actually express myself? Did I actually ever communicate that that's what I wanted? How long ago? Is there a chance they forgot? If we're assuming we know what they're thinking, we can ask ourselves, did they ever actually say that? And then, to overcome that communication barrier, we can ask/tell them, hey, did you forget when I said I don't like dishes being left in the sink? Hey, are you mad at me for something? Did I do something wrong? Excuse me, are you trying to be disrespectful or... Hey, I would really like if you'd buy me flowers for our anniversary. If you aren't used to talking this way to other people, it can seem a bit stilted at first, but it can also come off very natural with practice. I once had a roommate who came from a culture where direct confrontation is considered rude, so there may be a less direct way to ask these questions that would work better for people like that. Maybe something like, hey, I just want to check in that we're okay. Or, would you mind coming over here, away from the TV, to talk to me, please? The important thing is asking yourself if you're justified in jumping to conclusions about what they're thinking or what they know about what you're thinking, and one way or another seeking more information. That's going to be a common theme with these thinking traps. Let's move on to the next one. 2. It's all my fault. These next two are related. First is the it's all my fault fallacy, where you believe that you are the sole cause of all your problems with no accountability for anyone else. The main problem with taking on more blame than you deserve, other than the lack of accountability for others, is you may start to think that you can control things you can't. By failing to recognize that some things are beyond your control, you can beat yourself up for things that it doesn't help anyone for you to beat yourself up over, except maybe the person that you should be beating up instead. Let's look at a couple of examples. Okay, let's start with an extreme example, climate change. Yes, there are things that you can do that will make a tiny difference. You can control your own actions and set a good example for those around you by driving a fuel-efficient hybrid or electric vehicle. You can recycle. You can keep your house at 66 in the winter and 74 in the summer. You can buy only organic, free-range, or grass-fed food. But if you actually blame yourself for global warming, you'll fail to hold accountable all the corporate polluters, the local governments that don't even have a recycling program, the institutions that incentivize pollution and disincentivize the research needed to combat it. Okay, now let's take a look at a much smaller example. Your baby was just born with a rare genetic disease that doctors determined was passed down from your genes. Blaming yourself in this instance serves nobody. That baby is here now and needs your strength and support. While there may not be anybody else to blame, being hard on yourself only undermines your ability to be there for your child and the rest of your family. The best thing you can do is stop blaming yourself and instead focus on how much worse off your baby would be without you now. In other words, focus on what you can control. The third S that can help us avoid thinking traps is applicable to this case, and that is to suss out additional factors. So, if you're thinking you're the sole cause of the problem, the critical question to ask yourself is how other people or outside circumstances contributed. Now, let's take a look at the opposite case. 3. It's all their fault. Alternatively, there's the it's all their fault fallacy, which is the opposite, where you believe all your problems are caused by anyone and anything but you. The main problem with taking on too little responsibility is that you can end up in a victim mentality, feeling like you have no control over anything. We talked about controllables and uncontrollables a lot in our last video, and how failing to focus on what we can control makes us just leaves in the wind with no control over our lives. This doesn't put us in a very great or very resilient position. To give an example, let's go through the day of someone with this cognitive fallacy. Let's call her Bev. First thing in the morning, Bev goes to make a cup of coffee, and her favorite mug is in the sink. Instead of questioning, did I tell my partner to run the dishwasher last night? Or thinking, I should have run the dishes last night, she jumps to the conclusion, my partner is so selfish, she just couldn't be bothered to help me out. Then she goes to work, and on the way, someone cuts her off in traffic. Instead of thinking, wow, I should have been paying more attention, she thinks, get off your phone, jerk! Then she hits construction. Instead of thinking, gah, I should have left earlier, she blames the city. What are they even doing with our tax dollars anyway? Just making us late for work, that's all. True to her prediction, she's late to work, and her boss looks up from his desk to say, nice of you to show up. Instead of thinking, I deserve that, she grumbles to herself that he is such a jerk. Later, her boss comes over with corrections she needs to make to a memo she submitted yesterday. Instead of thinking, wow, I'm glad he caught these. It would have been really embarrassing if the memo had gone out like this. She thinks, I asked Shonda to look this over before I turned it in. That bitch, she set me up to look bad in front of the boss. At the end of the day, one of her colleagues asked her for help on a project that's going to require her to stay late. Instead of thinking, well, hey, maybe this is a way I can make up for being late this morning, she thinks, stupid Martin, he can't do anything by himself. Then, as she's finally leaving the office, her partner asks her to pick up dog food on the way home. Instead of thinking, oh, poor babies are out of food, of course I'll help with that, she thinks, what the hell has she been doing while I've been stuck here at work? Why couldn't she have gotten it herself? One thing that stands out about Bev is that she probably isn't very resilient throughout her day. If something goes wrong when she gets home, she isn't likely to be in any kind of mindset to be able to handle it well. Not that she handled any of her adversity throughout the day very well. Learning to take more control of her situation and her life will help Bev feel more in control in each of these situations. Note that the third S for avoiding thinking traps applies in this case as well. Suss out additional factors. The critical questions we can ask ourselves in the it's all my fault scenario are, as we said, how did others or outside circumstances contribute? In an it's all their fault scenario, we can ask, how did I contribute to this? Do I owe anyone an apology? Is there anything I can fix now? It's easy for this thinking trap in particular to become a toxic pattern of blaming others. And what's worse is that the more someone does this, the more it reinforces itself. This thinking pattern not only influences how events are experienced in the moment, but how they are remembered and interpreted as well. As in, when you think back on the event later, even if you didn't think it in the moment, you're more likely to blame others for what happened if you're already in the habit of doing that. This is true of most thinking traps, actually, including all the fallacies we're talking about today. I'll note that it is possible that any given circumstance might be all your fault, or that you might be completely free from blame. But jumping to these conclusions outright isn't likely to be accurate most of the time. 4. This will always suck. These last two variants of jumping to conclusions are related as well. First is the "this will always suck" fallacy, believing that one negative event will always be negative, that it will never stop affecting you in the way it does now, effectively, that time will never heal this particular trespass. For an example, consider getting a speeding ticket on your way to work. This makes you late for work, which causes you to get written up. You're convinced that this will make the difference between you and another candidate in a close race for a promotion. Since promotions aren't common in the organization, you figure it'll be at least another few years before you'll get another chance to promote. By that time, you won't be considered a young superstar anymore, and you're less likely to get the same opportunities you're hoping for now. In other words, this one speeding ticket is going to follow you for the rest of your career and prevent you from ever making it to the top. While it's impossible to know how long this one speeding ticket may actually follow you in your career, the attitude of hopelessness and helplessness that you may adopt if focusing only on this slew of unfortunate events is certainly not going to help. It may, in fact, be your attitude, not the write-up, that matters most in who gets promoted. So adopting an attitude that "it'll buff" is more likely to help you. And if you don't get the promotion, could a positive attitude make it so that your ultimate promotion is much more imminent than you currently believe? Could a good attitude help you find another job where you can promote more quickly? In other words, these negative, automatic thoughts may be unhelpful, and this may be a great opportunity to recognize that thinking trap, ask yourself some critical questions, shift your thinking, and get to a more helpful outcome. The critical question to ask in a "this will always suck" scenario is, what can I control? The S that will get you out of this thinking trap is the first one. Just take a deep breath and slow down. 5. Everything sucks. Then there's the "everything sucks" fallacy, believing that one negative event or aspect of one's character can substitute for all tangential events or aspects of your character. That one's character or worth can be judged by that one negative aspect, or that the one negative event is going to negatively affect more than just the one area of your life. In other words, that the scope of this one negative thing is all-encompassing. For example, consider the day your wife asks you to take care of the kids. When she gets home, she informs you that the littlest one missed her piano practice. You take this to heart and question how you could possibly ever think yourself worthy to be a father because you clearly can't do anything right. Not only that, if you're still aiming for that promotion at work, how could you possibly deserve that promotion when you can't even take care of your own kids? Again, these automatic thoughts probably aren't accurate and aren't leading to a helpful reaction. What your wife needs from you in this instance is for you to apologize for the mistake, commit to doing better next time, and continue to help her get the kids fed, bathed, and put in bed. Life goes on and doesn't have time for you to wallow. Besides, despite missing one extracurricular activity, you still got the kids up, fed, dressed, perhaps in interesting outfits, out the door and home again, all in one piece. Clearly you can handle a lot, and your ability to also juggle piano practice speaks virtually nothing of your ability to also manage subordinates at your job. In other words, again, the thoughts aren't helpful, and the best thing to do is recognize the thinking trap, ask yourself the critical questions, shift your thinking, and get to a more helpful reaction. The trick in an "everything sucks" scenario is our final S, to get specific. The critical questions are along the lines of, what specific behavior was the problem here? What specific area of my life is affected? In my last video, I mentioned the one thing, one time principle, and this would be a good place to apply that. This one thing or these specific things went wrong this one time or these specific times. Both the "this will always suck" and the "everything sucks" fallacies, one of time, the other of scope, have a tendency to lead to feelings of sadness, helplessness, and hopelessness. By our thought themes and BC connections we talked about in the last video, we know that sadness tends to lead to withdrawal. So people with these thinking patterns are less likely to seek help or get another perspective, which makes them especially vulnerable to the thinking patterns reinforcing themselves and leading to even deeper depression. For this reason, the Army MRT program considers these the most dangerous and toxic thinking traps, and they are unfortunately just as common as the others. Now, of course, with any of these thinking traps, all of which are forms of jumping to conclusions, you can also just slow down and ask yourself the critical question, what evidence is there for this conclusion? Of course, sometimes there is some evidence. How can you tell what's the difference between the exception and the rule? Well, that can be tricky, but the critical questions we're talking about today are designed to help. Focus on what you can control and only what you can control. Be open to what other people tell you and consider what evidence there is for their perspective. And if there's no way at all to tell which conclusion is right, such as in questions of faith, for example, it may ultimately come down to you believing whatever is most helpful for you to believe. But what if there's a lot of evidence, you say, and what if a lot of things really do suck? Well, you still want to slow down and ask yourself the critical questions to make sure you aren't jumping to conclusions. If you aren't, but you still feel overwhelmed by gloom, consider looking for the good, which fights the negativity bias, to try to get an accurate view of things around you. If you're confident you aren't falling for any thinking traps and the accurate view is still grim, then just focus on what you can control. Mark Twain famously said, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for certain that just ain't so." Obviously, that trouble can vary, but it can include interpersonal problems as well as getting in your own way and undermining your own resilience. If you catch yourself responding to something poorly and evaluate your ticker tape thoughts to be doom-ridden conclusions, the best course of action is to ask the critical questions. Now, slow down. What evidence is there for this conclusion? Did I ever actually tell anyone what I'm thinking, or am I asking them to read my mind? Did they ever actually say what I'm assuming they're thinking, or am I thinking I can read their mind? How did others or outside circumstances contribute to this situation? How did I contribute to this situation? Do I owe anyone an apology? Is there anything I can do to fix the situation now? What can I control here? What specific behavior, event, or other thing am I worried about? And what specific part of my life am I worried about it affecting? And don't forget the 4 S's of avoiding thinking traps. Slow down, speak up, suss out additional factors, and get specific. If you haven't seen it already, be sure to check out the Resilience ABC video, which this video builds on. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and tell me in the comments which thinking trap you most often fall into, or which cognitive bias you want me to cover next. Until next time, my name is Diana, and this has been Black, White, Gray, Yellow.
So clearly that means the Earth is a giant ruddy rhinoceros.